I arrived at the office that November morning the same way I always did, early, before the rush, when the building still held its overnight quiet. Autumn sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting everything in shades of honey and gold. I poured myself coffee and checked my schedule. Marcus, my department head, had requested a meeting about the quarterly projections. Nothing unusual, just another routine Friday. When I entered his office, he stood near the window, relaxed and composed. Marcus was somewhere in his early 50s, with that rare quality of making people feel both respected and challenged simultaneously. He glanced up and smiled warmly. "Come in, Sarah," he said, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk. His voice was measured, but there was something intentional about it, like he considered each word before speaking. I sat down, smoothing my blazer, mentally preparing for the usual discussion about metrics and targets. But almost immediately, something felt different. Not dramatic or obvious, just a subtle shift in the atmosphere, like the room had taken a deeper breath. He made a casual comment about a delayed client report, and I laughed, relieved it wasn't serious. That's when he leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. "Sarah, I've been meaning to tell you something," he said. "The way you navigate challenges here. You bring both sharp intelligence and genuine humanity to your work. That combination is incredibly rare." I blinked, caught off guard. It sounded like professional praise, but it felt like something more. It wasn't just about my performance metrics, it was about me, the person beneath the title. And somehow, he'd noticed. Heat rose to my cheeks. My pulse quickened. I wondered if I was reading too much into a simple compliment. We continued talking, but the spreadsheets and graphs seemed to fade into background noise. The conversation shifted, became something more personal. He asked about my life beyond these walls, my plans for the weekend, my family, the things I did to unwind. Simple questions, but they carried unexpected weight. They made me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced in years. When the meeting ended, I left his office with a swirl of emotions: surprise, curiosity, a quiet thrill that hummed beneath my skin. Marcus hadn't crossed any boundaries. He'd simply opened a door I hadn't realized was closed, and I found myself wondering what might exist on the other side. Walking back to my desk, I realized that the most transformative moments often arrive disguised as ordinary conversations, and I had the distinct feeling this was only the beginning. That evening, as I left the building and watched the city lights sparkle like scattered diamonds below, I felt like I was standing at the edge of something unexpected, something delicate but undeniable. And for the first time in a long while, I was genuinely excited to see where it might lead. The following week, every time Marcus called me into his office, I felt that same quiet anticipation. Not nervousness exactly, something warmer, like stepping into a space where you instinctively know you belong, even if you can't articulate why. One Wednesday afternoon, he asked me to stay after a team meeting. The conference room was peaceful, sunlight filtering through the blinds and casting geometric patterns across the table. I sat across from him, pretending to review my notes while stealing glances at his face, the thoughtful crease between his brows, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he was considering something carefully. He leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced, and spoke in that deliberate tone I'd come to recognize and appreciate. "Sarah," he began, "I've been thinking about how rare it is to find someone who truly listens, not just waiting for their turn to speak, but actually understanding what's being said beneath the words." Warmth spread through my chest like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "I think that's rare too," I said softly. "Even in environments like this, people hear you, but they don't always listen. Not really." He nodded slowly. "Exactly. That's why I value our conversations so much. You make it easier to be honest, even about things I've kept private for years, for a moment, everything." Outside that room seemed to vanish. It was just the two of us, connected by something quiet but powerful, something neither of us had planned, but both had recognized. My heart pounded, not with anxiety, but with the exhilarating sensation of being truly understood. He gestured toward the balcony. "Would you like to step outside for a moment, get some air?" On the terrace, cool November air wrapped around us, sharp and refreshing. The city stretched out below, distant and small from this height. We walked slowly, and I noticed details I hadn't before. The subtle scent of his cologne, the confident ease of his movements, the way his voice softened when he spoke about things that mattered to him. Then he stopped and turned to face me directly. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Sarah, I need to be honest with you. I value you far more than I've let on. Not just your work or your analytical mind, but who you are as a person. Your kindness, your humor, your thoughtfulness. It's remarkable, and I notice it every day." My breath caught. His words carried a depth that made something dormant inside me suddenly come alive. I realized what I was feeling wasn't just professional admiration. It was recognition, respect, a tender connection that neither of us had forced, but both had quietly nurtured over these weeks. I spoke before I could second-guess myself. I feel the same way, Marcus. I notice you too, more than anyone else in this building, more than I probably should. He smiled, that calm, reassuring smile that had become familiar. I'm glad you said that. I didn't want to risk making things uncomfortable, but I'm genuinely glad. We stood there a while longer, letting the silence communicate what words couldn't fully express. No dramatic declarations, no rushed confessions, just the quiet acknowledgement that something meaningful was growing between us. And in that moment, I knew that whatever this was, it was real. And it was ours. It was a quiet Friday afternoon when I realized how profoundly things had changed. The office hummed with its usual end-of-week energy, but for me everything felt transformed. Marcus and I still had our meetings, our terrace conversations, our meaningful exchanges, but now there was an unspoken depth in every glance, every carefully chosen word. That day, he called me into his office one final time before the weekend. Late afternoon sun poured through the blinds, bathing everything in golden light. I felt that familiar flutter of anticipation, the kind that comes from knowing someone truly sees you. Sarah, he said as I sat down, I've been reflecting on our conversations, on you. You've brought something into this space that I didn't realize was missing. Your authenticity, your insight, your genuine warmth. You've made this place feel more human. Emotion rose in my throat. Marcus, I feel the same way. I never expected to find someone who could listen the way you do, or who could make me feel understood, in ways I didn't even know I needed. He smiled and leaned back in his chair. I think we've both discovered something rare here. Something that transcends deadlines and corporate politics. It's about recognizing the best in each other. I respect you deeply, Sarah. Not just professionally, but personally. That's when I realized how much courage it had taken for both of us to be this honest. There was no pressure, no rush, just mutual respect and understanding that had grown organically between us. I felt overwhelming gratitude, not just for him, but for myself, for being brave enough to notice, to feel, and to acknowledge the connection without fear. We spent the next several minutes talking about small things, sharing stories, laughing softly, simply enjoying each other's company. It was ordinary in the most extraordinary way, the kind of moment that stays with you because it feels both natural and significant. But as the conversation flowed, something else began weighing on my mind. Something I hadn't allowed myself to fully examine until now. I took a breath and spoke carefully. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. His expression shifted to one of full attention. Of course, anything. Where do we go from here? I asked quietly. Because as much as I value what we have, I also recognize that this exists within a complicated context. You're in a position of authority. I work under your leadership, and I need to understand what this is and what it can realistically become. The air between us grew heavier but not uncomfortable. He nodded slowly, appreciating the directness of the question. You're right to ask, he said, his voice steady. I've been asking myself the same thing. What we have is genuine, Sarah, but you're also right that the context matters. Our professional relationship creates boundaries we need to respect. I felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief that he understood the complexity, disappointment that reality was more complicated than the connection we felt. I don't want to lose what we have, I said softly. But I also don't want to compromise either of our positions here, or create a situation that could hurt us professionally. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes meeting mine with complete sincerity. Neither do I. Which is why I think we need to be intentional about this. What we have is built on respect and authenticity. Let's continue honoring that by being honest with each other and maintaining appropriate boundaries in professional settings. And outside of work? I asked, my heart beating faster. He paused, considering carefully. Outside of work, we're two adults who have discovered a meaningful connection. I think we can explore that thoughtfully, as long as we're both comfortable and clear about expectations. I nodded slowly, feeling both the weight and the possibility of what he was saying. So we move forward carefully, honestly, respectfully. Exactly, he said. No hidden agendas, no games, just two people who value each other, navigating this with integrity. Something settled inside me, a sense of clarity I hadn't felt before. This wasn't a fairy tale romance that would magically resolve itself. It was real, complex, and would require ongoing honesty and care. But that made it more valuable, not less. I can do that, I said. As long as we keep communicating like this. Always, he promised. The following weeks unfolded with a new kind of balance. At work, Marcus and I maintained professionalism, appropriate distance in meetings, clear boundaries in team settings. But outside the office, we began spending time together in ways that felt natural and right. Coffee on Saturday mornings at a cafe across town where no colleagues would see us. Long walks through the city parks as autumn deepened into early winter. Conversations that ranged from philosophy to favorite childhood memories to dreams we'd never shared with anyone else. We were careful, but we were also genuine. And somehow that combination worked. One Saturday evening, as we sat in a quiet bookstore cafe, Marcus reached across the table and gently took my hand. "I need to tell you something," he said. My heart quickened. "What is it?" "I've decided to speak with HR," he said. "I want to disclose our relationship and explore whether a department transfer might be possible, either for you or for me. Not because I'm ashamed of what we have, but because I want to protect it. I want us to be able to move forward without the shadow of professional complications." Tears pricked my eyes. Not sad tears, but grateful ones. "You do that?" Without hesitation, he said. "You're worth it. What we have is worth it. And I'd rather face the complexity head-on than risk losing something this meaningful because we were afraid to be honest." I squeezed his hand, overwhelmed by his integrity. "Then we do this together. Whatever comes next, we face it as a team." He smiled, that warm, reassuring smile that had become my favorite thing. Together. Always. 3 months later, I stood in my new office on a different floor, in a different department. The transfer had gone through smoothly. HR had been supportive, recognizing that we'd approached the situation with complete transparency and professionalism. Marcus and I were no longer in a direct reporting relationship. We were simply two people who'd found each other in an unexpected place and had chosen to honor that connection with courage and honesty. That evening, as we walked through the city together, no longer hiding, no longer worried about who might see us, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life had surprised me. It had opened a door I didn't know existed, and had required me to walk through it with vulnerability and courage. I discovered that meaningful connection could appear in the most ordinary places, in a routine meeting, in a casual conversation, in the moments when you let your guard down enough to be truly seen. And I'd learned that the most valuable relationships aren't the ones that come easily, but the ones you're willing to protect with integrity, honesty, and respect. As we reached my apartment building, Marcus pulled me close and kissed my forehead gently. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" I asked. "For being brave enough to acknowledge what we have, for pushing us to do this the right way, for reminding me that real connection is worth fighting for." I looked up at him, my heart full. "Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me, and for teaching me that love, real love, isn't about perfection. It's about showing up honestly, even when it's complicated." We stood there in the soft glow of streetlights, two people who'd found something rare and chosen to honor it with courage. The journey hadn't been simple, but it had been real, and that made all the difference. A year later, I sat by my window watching the city lights stretch into the distance, reflecting on everything that had happened. Marcus was in the kitchen making tea, humming softly, a sound that had become the soundtrack of my evenings. We'd navigated the complicated beginning with grace. We'd built something genuine on a foundation of mutual respect and honesty. And we discovered that the most meaningful connections are the ones that challenge you to be your most authentic, courageous self. Life had given me an unexpected gift, not just a relationship, but a reminder that transformation can begin with a single honest conversation. That meaningful connection requires vulnerability. And that the courage to feel, to speak, and to listen can turn simple moments into something unforgettable. As Marcus brought me tea and settled beside me, I smiled softly. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly, profoundly grateful. Not just for him, but for the journey that had brought us here. Complicated, beautiful, and undeniably real.